It's moments like these when you think to yourself, am I in the wrong job? This was me about a month ago, tucked under my parents' house, installing some insulation in their floor. But here's what I found out. Actually, it's fairly straightforward and a job that you can do as a DIYer. So I'm going to show you exactly what I did so you can install insulation in your suspended floors as well.
This was not made for hips, I can tell you that much.
It's quite common to have suspended timber floors like this in older houses where the soil ground is uneven or sloped. Building the floor suspended like this also meant that there was going to be good airflow and the timber joists were not going to get rotten. Maintaining this airflow when you install your insulation is really important, so I will show you how to do that a little bit later on. But it's not all drawbacks, because having a floor like this makes it a lot easier to install things like wiring and pipework, much more so than a solid concrete floor. By installing insulation, you can often save on your energy bills, so it pays for itself after a period of time. Luckily, there is actually a fair bit of space underneath the living room floor. I've seen lots of other videos that have done underfloor insulation and the space has been maybe like a foot and someone is crawling under there as if they're going caving, which is, hard no, terrifying. The amount of space that you'll have underneath your floating floor will vary. In this example, there's almost entire rooms. I can't stand up in here fully, but there's a lot of space to walk around. In other instances, there might just be a very small gap that you'd have to crawl under. And in that circumstance, you can actually install it from above by lifting the floorboards, and you can install a breathable membrane that holds the insulation, a bit like a hammock. But in this video, I'm going to show you how to install it in a suspended timber floor from underneath. Something else you could use instead of a breathable membrane is netting, which is what I'm using here. And you attach it to the joists from underneath using something like a staple gun, pressing it up against and then adding a couple of staples to keep it secure. But should you install the netting first or the insulation first? Let's try both ways and see which is better. The first way that I tried was adding the netting first and installing the insulation afterwards. I'm definitely finding that it is easier to stuff the insulation up in the space first and then attach the net afterwards. Unfortunately, I've already added this half, so I'm just squeezing it in, which isn't actually too much trouble. So I conducted an experiment and it's easier to put the insulation up first, but there are benefits to putting the netting up first. For example, not all of these joists are going to be standardised widths apart, and sometimes when you put the insulation up there, it just falls back out again. But I found a solution to this. I added some small strips of netting to the joist just to keep these very long bits in place before I can put the rest of the netting on. One of the great things about this insulation is that it comes partially cut. As you can see here, there are 4 different sections. This is so you can have 40 centimetres, 40 centimetres, 40 centimetres, or 60. So it already comes partially pre-cut, depending on the width in between your joists, which varies per house. You're even able to get your hand in there and wiggle it around, and it breaks up most, if not all, of the insulation. I'm going to need 2 hands for this. This section had loads of different wires and pipes to contend with, and a bit later on I'll show you how to install some foam insulation over the pipes. The pipe insulation are the foam tubes that you might see over your pipes. Now these do a couple of things. They stop the pipes from getting warm next to combustible materials, but they also stop it from losing heat as water travels through the system. Something you really want to think about is when you're in a space like this, there might be wires and pipes everywhere. Now you'd like to think that people are safely managing their wires, but especially when you're moving into a house that's been around for a while, people don't always have good practices when it comes to wires. And there was a whole bunch of wires in here just hanging down, snipped at the end. I've got no idea if they're live, so be very mindful of that. Get a testing kit to make sure that those wires aren't live. And err on the side of caution and have the electrics off if you're going to do some investigations into what they are. I've almost done this half. I've done this half first because there's a little bit more space. It gives me a chance to get used to the activity of installing the insulation. And it means I can build up my courage to crawl through next door in a minute, like a little worm. Once I get to this point, I've got a tiny bit too much insulation for this space, so I just measure it by eye, tucking it up in the corner, and then ripping off the bit that I don't need with my mask on. This end has to go in first.
The goal is to make sure that the insulation fills the entire space. You don't want to be pushing it up so that it is squished up against the floorboard, but you do want to make sure that it is in there snugly.
I forgot to cut it. Back out! Okay. Oh, so silly. Yes. Then I cut it by hand. Okay. Here we are.
You know how much I love to show you the mistakes that I come across when I'm doing DIY, so I thought I'd leave that little gem in there for you to show just some of the things, some of the little hiccups that went wrong.
It just pops up there.
In situations where there are pipes in the way, I have taken a cut down the middle of the netting and attached it either sides directly to the joists. This is a much better option than attaching over the top of the pipes, as the insulation would then be drooping and wouldn't be secure in the gaps.
On the right of your screen, these floorboards continue through into the other room. Therefore, I have installed the insulation right up to the edge. But what you'll want to do around the circumference of the property is to add a 10 to 20 centimetre gap to allow for airflow. This is also the same when you're insulating your loft. You leave a 10 to 20 centimetre gap around the edges of the loft room to allow for this circulation. Let me show you what I mean. This is a vent that goes up into the living room, and we definitely don't want to block this. And this is an air brick that goes outside. These both need to be kept clear, and you can achieve that by cutting short the insulation.
I finished this side of the room, which is underneath the hallway. And now it's time to venture into that little hole and that large dark room and finish this off. But it looks great this side. I've done so much. I'm feeling very pleased. The last section to do is in here. Wish me luck. Okay, I'm going in. Oh.
After throwing all the insulation into the next room, this is when I called the end of day
Don't
one.
be so serious.
Day two started with spider webs. Lots of them. This entire next room has not been accessed for a very long time, so I'm going to have to contend with quite a lot of creepy crawlies. I'm going to crawl in there with my hood up and a little duster and get rid of everything. Whilst I fight with these spider webs, I thought it might be useful for you to know how much this project cost me, to get an idea of what your project might cost you. For this project, I had all of the tools that I needed, for example, a drill to install the pipe clips and a staple gun. So there may be some additional costs if you don't have some of these things already, but these are the costs of just the materials. The only other thing not on this list are cable ties, because I already had some of these that I could use at home. I also didn't use up all of these materials, having about half of the netting left, which gives us a total of £284.92. And for this, I completed the dining room, the shower room, and the hallway, all of which together were about 6 metres wide and about 8.5 metres long, so a very big space. There's two main sections in this side of the room, and I decided to start over here in the smaller section just because I wanted to get it out of the way. And it turns out that the insulation doesn't fit through this hole because it's much smaller, so I had to drag it through a bit like a hamster. And now it's time for the pipe insulation. You'll want to do this to stop your pipes from losing all of the heat as the water travels through the system. The foam pipe comes with a partially cut slit down the side, and you can just run your thumb through this slit to open it fully. And it's in this gap that you install the pipe, just sliding it over. You need to cut it wherever there's going to be a clip, like I'm doing here. And I also quite like to secure it with a cable tie. It doesn't need to be tight, but it does make it less likely to fall off. Whether or not a pipe needs to be insulated depends what it's used for. You might have pipes under here that are used for the radiator system. You might also have pipes that are used for the water supply system. I install the pipe insulation on both the hot and the cold pipes because the cold ones, especially in a basement area like this, are at risk of freezing. And if they freeze, there's a chance that they'll burst. The pipes that you won't necessarily need to insulate are the gas supply pipes, as these won't freeze and they won't be losing heat. You can tell which are your water pipes and which are your gas pipes by either tracking them back to where they originate, or often by the size, with gas pipes commonly being thicker than water supply pipes. Another thing that I am doing whilst I'm down here is correctly installing these radiator pipes up against the joists. It seems that when this was installed, they weren't correctly secured, so they're hanging down right into the middle of the room. But this is something that's also quite easy to resolve by just getting some pipe clips. These are what the pipe clips look like, and they simply screw into the joists with a single screw in the centre. And once they're in place, you can pop the pipe into the gap and then just close it so that it's nice and secure.
I decided to finish up for the day by clearing up a lot of this rubbish, wires, plasterboard, and some sort of sweet corn tin. See you tomorrow.
Let me show you how I get under the house. Just left my mum's. I'm going to come out into the garage that's on the side of the house, and it's through here that we can access the under the house. I was going to say basement, but it's not really a basement. This room is just filled with a whole load of bits and bobs, Christmas stuff you don't want to throw away. But in this gap, in the middle of the room, there's the entryway to under the house. I use my best skills to get through all of this stuff. Oh, I don't always win. And into the depths. Let me switch the lights on. And when I say lights, these are literally just the lights that I'm using to be able to work in this space. This whole area is unlit, so it has made it a little bit more difficult. I brought down the lighting from my house. I'm also going to show you where I have to go to get into that far room. So this is the initial room. This is under the stairs, and that is one room and that is another. But to get into here, you have to crawl through a little tiny hole down here that you can't quite see. There it is. You have to crawl in like you're going caving, and then an even smaller hole up there to get into that room. I'm not flexible enough for this, so I really have to lift my leg up to get in there. Oh, my goodness. Okay. I'm going to stick these knee pads on because this ground is super tough on my knees. Okay, here we go. This is the bigger of the holes, so it's not too bad. Oh my goodness. In we go. Oh, one down. I've also got some gloves that I realise I've left in the other room, but I shall persist. Yeah,
Yeah, see that hole? I don't mind. That's pretty big. This one, not quite big enough for my hips. And it really does make me feel like I'm going caving. Oh no. Arms in first. And wiggle them along. Oh, okay. Running out of breath. Oh, here it is. This is the far room. Oh, this is the worst bit because this is where my hips always get stuck. Oh gosh. Come on. Okay. I did it. This is where the knee pads are extremely helpful. Okay. I'm super excited because this is actually the very last time that I need to come into this room, having done most of this over the last couple of days. I ran out of staples just before I was due to finish, so gutted that I had to come back in here. But let me show you the progress so far. So here's the room. You can probably see here it's dipping quite a lot. It's because I haven't stapled the net to the joists, but it's looking so much tidier. This corner's looking much better. These pipes were falling down previously. I've still got a bit of work to do just to give them a bit more support. But it's looking amazing. Look at this. Oh, wow, that's so dusty. Time to get this on, I think.
In terms of what kind of insulation to buy, there's a number of different options.
The type that I have is a kind of fiberglass, which can be quite irritating to the skin, and that's why I need to wear my mask. However, it is less expensive than rock wool, or mineral wool, as it's also called.
It's also possible to get rigid foam board as insulation, but I find this just so fussy to work with, as you have to cut it to exactly the right size. And this option is also more expensive than the fiberglass, but have a look and see what's out there and work out what's going to be best for your project.
You may notice that my insulation is actually a couple of different colours. This is because I ran out and I had some of the white in my house that I could use, so didn't need to go back to the shops. This is a type of non-itch recycled loft insulation. It's a little bit thinner than the rest that I was using, so I've just doubled it over. It's a bit more expensive too, but it's what I had available. What I do like about this white insulation, however, is that it comes in these packs which are pre-cut, so they're so much easier to fit in the car, easier to transport, easier to get into this room as well. This room is now completely finished, and I just have to do the main room next door and I'll be done. And it wasn't long before I could make my final caving expedition out of this basement area and have a very long bath. This is the second room done.
So there we have it, installing insulation into a suspended timber floor. I really hope this has been helpful to you, and if it has in any way, please do subscribe. It really helps out my channel. I have thousands of free videos about how to do DIY, and I also have my first paid for DIY course for basic home maintenance. I'll add that link in the description.
And if you have any suggestions of videos that you'd like to see, feel free to drop these in the comments. Wait, who turned out the lights? Oh no.